Hello, welcome to part 3 in a series of videos on notation and terminology in vibrational astrology. The terms alignment and aligned. These terms are sometimes used to indicate that planets are conjunct or opposition. So you'll hear a statement like an alignment of Sun, Mars, and Jupiter means that they're either conjunct or opposition. So alignment means on an axis, conjunct or opposition. They are aligned or in an alignment. That's what it means in vibrational astrology. And where we hear this term the most in vibrational astrology, I can't think of any other context where we hear it very often. Maybe there is one I'm not thinking of. But one place where we hear it a lot is with isotraps. Isotraps. So let's learn what an isotrap is, and this is often where we also hear the word alignment. An isotrap is a configuration of 4 planets in which a midpoint is conjunct or opposition to another midpoint. Okay, that's one definition of an isotrap. There are actually at least 2 different definitions of an isotrap. You can describe the isotrap in completely different ways and get the same result. The isotrap is this picture on the left, A, B, C, D, where A, B, C, and D are planets in a chart wheel. Now, where is the midpoint of A and B? Would be at the top of the chart wheel. So if this is a chart wheel, suppose A is the sun in the 11th house and B is the moon, in the 8th or 9th house, and D is Mars in the 2nd house or something, and C is some planet, Saturn in the 5th house, whatever. So, where would the midpoint of A and B be? Would be at the top of the chart. So the midpoint of A and B is at the top of the chart. Where's the midpoint of C and D? Well, C and D are down at near the 2nd and 5th house, below the middle of the chart. They're at the bottom of the chart. So the midpoint of C and D would be opposition the midpoint of A and B. I mean, it's obvious. What we're assuming here is that this side, BC, the length from planet C to planet B, is the same as the length between planets A and D. So when these 2 lengths are the same, when you have 2 pairs of planets that are separated by the same angular distance, you will also have a midpoint to midpoint alignment. There is that word, alignment. So here I've written it at the bottom of this diagram on the left side. The AB midpoint equals the CD midpoint, so there is also a midpoint alignment. So you can describe an isotrap. One way to describe it is that it's when 2 pairs of planets are separated by the same angular distance. Let me say that again. An isotrap occurs when 2 pairs of planets are separated by nearly the same angular distance. So the AD angle is almost identical to the BC angle. AD equals BC. As soon as 2 pairs of planets are having almost the same angular distance, maybe A is the sun, D is the moon, B is Mars, C is Jupiter. So the sun, moon, AD is angular distance, same as some other pair, like Mars and Jupiter, whatever planets they are. When that happens, you get this shape. Maybe the top is small, like if B and C are moved up, it could be small, the base could be wider, the sides could be smaller or bigger. It's going to always be what we call an isosceles trapezoid. Symmetrical pattern. It's like a rectangle with 2 sides pushed in by the same amount. You can also think of it as a triangle, a symmetrical triangle, what we call an isosceles triangle. Triangle with the top cut off. So it's this triangle, a symmetrical one, where these angular angles here are the same. So there's many ways to describe what an isotrap is. We call it isotrap, which is short for isosceles trapezoid. You can describe it as, let me say that phrase again, two pairs of planets have nearly identical angular distances between them. Nearly identical because we allow an orb. You know, everything in astrology we allow some orb. It doesn't have to be, to the minute exact. We allow an orb. With isotraps, the orb is small. That's one explanation of an isotrap, is that two pairs of planets are separated by nearly an identical angular distance. Another description of an isotrap is it's a midpoint to midpoint alignment. It sounds like two completely different descriptions. One is talking about angular distances being the same. Another description is talking about midpoints being aligned. That sounds like two completely different things. One is angular distances being the same. The other is two midpoints being aligned. It's actually the same identical thing. And you can also describe an isotrap as a geometric shape, which I just did. It's an isosceles trapezoid, is what's called in geometry. We call this configuration an isotrap. It has other names in other systems of astrology. I'm not going to go into that, but we call it isotrap. Okay. So with that information, let's read what I say here. It's just going to say what I've just said, but let's hear it again. A configuration of 4 planets, right? It's always 4. Isotrap is 4 planets, in which a midpoint is conjunct or opposition to another midpoint. Another way of saying this is that there's a midpoint to midpoint alignment, right? Because alignment means conjunction or opposition. The geometric shape is an isosceles trapezoid. That's the shape formed by the 4 planets. We use the term isotrap as an abbreviation for isosceles trapezoid. The geometric shape of an isotrap has 4 sides, a top and a bottom, and the 2 lines on the side that have the same length. Right? That's pretty straightforward. Because the 2 sides have nearly an identical length, these 2 pairs of planets resonate with each other. So the AD, whatever planets they are resonating with the BC planets. They're activating each other. It's creating a 4-planet connectivity. Those planets are interacting in a similar way to an aspect. It's bringing those planets together. They're not separate in the chart. And what's really fascinating is that, to read from the slide here, the diagonal lines in the isotrap also have nearly an identical length. So there's a double resonance. So the angular distance from planet D to B is going to be the same as C to A. So an isotrap always creates a double resonance. By double resonance, we mean there are 2, there's the AD is, well, let me just use the example here. AD equals BC, and AC, the diagonal, is the same as BD. Double resonance. And that double resonance makes all 4 planets integrate together into a very tight system. And it means the person is affected. It can express those planets all connected together, almost like they were in aspect to each other. And it doesn't matter what the angular distance is to create the resonance. Of course, if there's some particular aspect involved, like suppose the BC is a sextile and the AD is also a sextile, well, you have sextiles as well. That would be important. That would add to the meaning of what's going on. But it doesn't matter what those angular distances are to make the midpoint to midpoint alignment and to make the double resonance. All those things are going on in an isotrap. In an isotrap, there's double resonance, and there's also a midpoint to midpoint alignment. So thus, reading my second to last sentence on the slide, thus an isotrap has both a double resonance and a midpoint to midpoint alignment. Note that, let's see, if you're looking at a listing of midpoints, to like midpoint to midpoint connections or something like that, all 4 planets obviously have to be different. So Jupiter, Saturn midpoint, conjunct Uranus, Neptune midpoint, is that an isotrap? Question. Yes or no? Is Jupiter, Saturn midpoint, conjunct Uranus, Neptune midpoint an isotrap? Answer, yes. Yes. It's a midpoint to midpoint alignment. Doesn't matter whether it's a conjunction or opposition. Doesn't matter what the 4 planets are. It's an isotrap. It doesn't matter what the 4 planets are as long as they are different planets. Next question. Is Jupiter, Saturn midpoint, conjunct Jupiter, Neptune midpoint an isotrap? Is it? It is not an isotrap because we don't have 4 separate planets. We have Jupiter repeating twice. I mean, that's obvious, right? But it's obvious when you say it, but, you know, if you don't think about it, you might sometimes think, oh, there's Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, that's an isotrap. No, it isn't. They have to all be separate planets, all different planets, 4 different planets. Okay, so there you see the use of the word alignment, which was the first thing we started discussing in this video. And we end up using that word alignment in the context of isotraps, that there's a midpoint to midpoint alignment. There the word alignment is handy because otherwise we have to say there's a midpoint to midpoint. A midpoint is conjunct or opposition to another midpoint. Just a lot more words there. People like to use these nice, concise terms, so you don't have to say all that. Midpoint to midpoint alignment is what we have in an isotrap. Okay, so here's an isotrap. Let's look at a real world example, an actual real one. And also we're going to learn something new by looking at this example. This again is the birth chart of Julia Roberts that we've been looking at. There's her Saturn up there. It's 7 Aries 09. You might remember her, that part of her chart. And she has Venus at 18 Virgo 04, Uranus at 27 Virgo 12, Mercury at 13 Scorpio 53, Neptune at 23 Scorpio 21. And if you look at this, doesn't appear to be a lot going on with vibrational astrology. This is not a sextile. It's got a 5-degree orb. It's way out of orb. Doesn't seem to be much going on that's obvious. But there is a connection. Venus, Uranus, Mercury, and Neptune are working together. They're working together. And by the way, this is a good combination for things like theater. This is a very good combination. She is an actress. Mercury, Venus gives verbal intelligence, a sense of beauty and aesthetics and the use of words, appreciation of literature. Uranus, Neptune is magic, the magic of Hollywood and cinema and the stardom and the out of this world things that happen in movies, that are beyond the humdrum everyday life we have. There's the magic of it. So this is very appropriate. It makes sense that she would have this in her chart. I'm giving you an idea of how the interpretation works. These planets are connected together, and isotraps tend to be, you could say, positive. They tend to get something done. They tend to achieve something, but they're also not highly focused. They give a tone quality, a strong tone quality, but it's hard to predict the specific behavior. It gives a general orientation to life. So here we get a general orientation of being inclined to things that are inspirational and sensitive use of understanding of language and stories and things like that. Okay, so what's happening is that the angle between Venus and Uranus, we could pull up a different kind of chart wheel. Well, let me show you how you would do that. Here's her birth chart. So there's the birth chart of Julia Roberts. If I right click, I'm in the series software, of course, and I stretched this out a little bit. I was showing the midpoints in a previous in one of the previous videos in this series. Okay, so now you can see that. So if I right click and I go to C, small technical table, or any of these small, here's another small one. I'll just select that one. I've got a big aspect grid. And what was I going to say here? That the Venus-Uranus angle is 9 degrees 8 minutes. So if I go to this aspect grid, Venus-Uranus, there it is, 9 degrees 8 minutes. And let's just look at one more. Mercury-Neptune, 9 degrees 29 minutes. Mercury-Neptune, 9 degrees 28 minutes. What happens when you subtract the positions? You can be 1 minute off. The computer's going to do it slightly more accurately. It's not a rounding error. Anyway, it's only 1 minute. So 9 degrees 28 minutes is a little more precise than when we subtract it manually, get 9 degrees 29 minutes. But my real point is that you can look at that aspect grid and confirm that the distance from Venus to Uranus, 9 degrees 8 minutes, distance from Mercury to Neptune, 9 degrees 29 minutes. So if we look at the difference there, there's a difference of 21 minutes. Almost the same exact angle. Now this is the thing that we're going to learn that's new, is that the difference between the angular distances is 21 minutes. Venus-Uranus has a 9 degree 8 minutes orb, a 9 degree 8 minute angle. Mercury-Neptune is 9 degrees 29 minutes. These two sides, these are the two sides of the isotrap. There's the isotrap. I drew it in purple. That's the triangle. It's like an upside down triangle with the top is facing down, cut off. There it is. The two sides have almost the same angular distance. And we said a midpoint isotrap also has a midpoint to midpoint alignment. And in this case, it's the Mercury-Uranus midpoint is going to be conjunct the Venus-Neptune midpoint. We can see that they would be conjunct because they're both, all this is together on one side of the chart. And when we look at those midpoints, I could show you in the program, where they are and all that, but we don't need to prove every little thing here. You can take my word for it. The orb for the Mercury-Uranus midpoint conjunct the Venus-Neptune midpoint is 10 minutes. So the point I want to make here is that the orb of the midpoints is half of the difference in resonance. Let me say that again. The orb of the midpoint to midpoint alignment, in this case Mercury-Uranus midpoint conjunct Venus-Neptune midpoint, is 10 minutes. That means that the difference in the angular distances, the difference in the resonance, the difference between the Venus-Uranus angle and the Mercury-Neptune angle will be twice as much. It's just the way it works out. It's the way the arithmetic works out. And it comes out to 21 minutes. And so half of 21 would be 10 and a half, and it rounds off to be 10. So, and also in a midpoint isotrap, the diagonal lines have the same length. That means the distance from Venus to Mercury and from Uranus to Neptune is also the same. And if we look at the aspect grid, we'll see that the Uranus-Neptune angle, 56 degrees 9 minutes. The Mercury-Venus angle, 55 degrees 49 minutes. What's the difference between these two? How much angular difference is there between 56 degrees 9 minutes and 55 degrees 49 minutes? 20 minutes. Half of 20 minutes is 10 minutes, is the orb of the midpoint to midpoint. So a thing to keep in mind is that if you use a half a degree orb for the midpoint to midpoint, the difference in the angular distances is twice that, is 1 degree. So in vibrational astrology, we usually measure the orb of isotraps as the orb of the midpoint to midpoint. So we often look at this as a Mercury-Uranus midpoint conjunct to Venus-Neptune midpoint. There are other situations where we'll look at it as the angular distances being the same. But when you're looking at it as midpoint to midpoint, keep in mind that the difference between the the resonance, these two sides, is twice as big. So I believe that the orbs for isotraps are very small, very small. Might be as small as only a half a degree for the midpoint to midpoint alignment, which is a 1 degree difference in the angular distances between the pairs of planets. Okay, so that is the isotrap. Anytime, I'm just reading what we have here on the side, anytime two pairs of planets are separated by nearly the same angular distance, an isotrap is formed. There it is. Venus-Uranus angle, same as Mercury-Neptune. You know, it's from a vibrational astrology viewpoint, it's really very, very cool. Like the Venus-Uranus angle, it's the same as Mercury-Neptune. It's like two strings vibrating at the same note. And then the Venus-Mercury angle is going to always be the same as Uranus-Neptune. You always get a double resonance. I've got here in the middle of the wheel midpoint alignment and double resonance. So you got all this resonance going on, bringing Mercury, Neptune, and Venus, Uranus together, and then plus the midpoints are aligned because of the symmetry. So it's a really beautiful thing. You have double resonance, the midpoints are aligned. And in this case, the orb is 10 minutes. I suspect that the maximum orb may be only half a degree. And when you're under 15 minutes, it appears to really be strong and have a clear effect. Now, we don't know yet what the orb is for isotraps. We haven't done careful enough controlled research, the extreme case sampling studies, or some other kind of study to be really certain and to feel comfortable when we apply that idea with clients. You know, we're very, very data-driven, and you might say empirical in vibrational astrology. So we're not entirely certain yet what the orbs are. Over time, I'm inclining more and more to suspect they're very small, but we don't know yet. Okay, but she definitely, Julia Roberts definitely has this isotrap. 10-minute orb for the midpoint to midpoint. I think every vibrational astrologer agrees that's there. That's no doubt about it. That much we know. And it does makes a lot of sense for her, for what she does. And she's got that charisma, which when you pull Neptune into these things, it typically does. To succeed in, as a great actress. Okay. Now, if you want to find, how would you find these isotraps? How do you know that Mercury's midpoint is conjunct Venus Neptune? Right now, we're going to be adding more ways to find this, but right now in the Kepler and Sirius software, you go to harmonic listing number 1 and you scroll to the bottom and you will see this. I'll show you. Here's let's drag this over and expand it a little bit. And let's pull up a nice simple wheel. Okay, so there's Julia Roberts. I want to know what isotraps she has. I can go to listings, harmonic patterns listings here, right? Harmonic patterns listings, and then number 1. Harmonic triangles, quadrangles, midpoint to midpoint. That's why it's so important to know this. If you see midpoint to midpoint, that means isotrap, right? It's another word for isotrap. What if you see something like, sometimes people call it same phase angle. Same phase angle just means same angular distance between two pairs of planets. That's also an isotrap. Okay, so it doesn't say isotrap, it says midpoint to midpoint, but midpoint to midpoint, if you're talking about conjunctions and oppositions, that's an isotrap. So if we pull this up and just scroll all the way to the bottom, there's all kinds of stuff in here. You'll find the midpoint to midpoint, and there it is. Mercury, Uranus midpoint, conjunct the Venus-Neptune midpoint, orb, 0 degrees, 10 minutes. So that's the only midpoint she has with an orb under 15 minutes. And those are the ones that clearly are there. I mean, they're clearly strong. And I believe the 15 to 30 minutes are there as well. And some people are going way up. We have those with 1 to 3 degree orbs. There tend to be a lot of those. We don't know. I'm a little skeptical of those, but some people suspect that they also work. We need to do more research and get this really figured out and become more confident about exactly what the orb is. But at least we know small orbs, very solid, definitely there. You're under 15-minute orb with the midpoint to midpoint, it's there. And it's clear, and you can see it working clearly in the people's lives. And it makes sense, as it does for Julia Roberts. So there's the listing. I just copied and pasted it here that you will see. So that's how you find the isotraps. Okay, let's see. We are at 26 minutes. Let's cover one more thing. The midpoint isotrap. Or you know what? I'm not. I changed my mind. Let's do the midpoint isotrap in the next video because it's extremely important. I don't want to rush through it. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about here. This is a very, very powerful, extremely important planetary configuration. When you see a midpoint isotrap with small orbs, let me say that again. You're looking at a chart and you see a midpoint isotrap with small orbs. Small orbs mean under half a degree. When we look at it, it's powerful. It's a combination of midpoints and isotraps. Okay, we will look at it in the next video in this series. Okay, thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.